now it's time for our clinical topic, and our guest speaker today is Dr. Larissa Figari-Goller. She earned her dental degree at Stony Brook and then did a one-year GPR at North Shore University Hospital. These are both great institutions. I visited them both recently, and they're both top-notch. She has since earned her master's of the Academy of General Dentistry, as well as her fellowship in the ICOI. She's a mentor at the FICOI Center. Her lecture today is Anterior Injectable Composite Restorations, Creating Harmony and Balance. So we are looking forward to this very practical lecture. So take it away, Dr. Figari-Goller.
Hi, all. I'm really excited to be presenting for Gladwell today. I actually have taken many of the classes on the Friday afternoons because I'm here on the East Coast. And they definitely helped me in order to get my mastership in the AGD and make sure that I fulfilled some of those categories to check those boxes. But I'm excited to share my presentation today and hopefully shift some of that really positive energy, which I am very excited about this topic. So the topic today is anterior injectable composite restorations and creating harmony and balance. So the learning objectives are to recognize the effect size and shape of anterior teeth can have on the aesthetics and occlusion. Understand how to work with the lab to develop the size and shape and plan for conversion. I'm just going to minimize this. 1 second. I'm so sorry. I just have the pictures of everybody else up on the side. I just want to shift that off. Okay. So I have a special place in my heart for children like this one. All of you have seen patients like this one with peg laterals that you've caught on x-rays, seeing that there's microdontia. The difference for me is that I have a connection to some of these kids because this is me. There's a lot that's involved in all of this, and sometimes we have to look at it a little bit deeper and understand what goes on behind this. This was me right after my braces were taken off. Most kids can't wait for that day. They're so excited. They look forward to it. But for me, it was a little bit different. I knew that once my braces were off, you were going to see all the spaces. And to me, that wasn't the most comfortable thing. For many families of children just like me, those kids and parents know that there's a genetic component to this. And sometimes there's a little bit of guilt. There's some stress involved because they don't know how much time that means for the dental chair. They don't know what the future holds for them and what the costs are. So it can be quite stressful for many of these kids and their families. But the thing that's really been amazing for me is that through many hours of continuing education, I've been able to play around with a lot of different materials and figured out that this technique that I'm about to go over today has been really game-changing for patients just like this one. So there is a special place in my practice. There's a special place in my practice for patients just like this. And when I see patients like this, I feel like I welcome them with open arms. I bring them in and I explain to their parents and to them, what this looks like and how they can go through it step by step with me. It's all about that energy that you create that first day that you meet them, letting them know that it's not that they are unique, but that they are special and we can work with that. So this has been a game-changing technique. So this is my brother. He holds back his smile. This was when we were probably in high school. He never smiled in family pictures. So sometimes you also have to remember that, the impact that you might have can be huge if you can make that difference and let them share their smile. So when people hold back their smile, there's usually a reason for it. And there's an emotional implication, psychological implications that can go along with it. Thankfully for me and my brother, we had great parents that helped to kind of plug it in and make sure that we moved forward in the right direction. Definitely one of the reasons why I wanted to become a dentist when I was young. And it was because I was very much involved in the planning and the understanding of what was going on in my mouth. And I'm very thankful for those dentists that I worked with back then to give me the best that they could at that point. But knowing now that there's even better materials and products on the market, and the amount of change in the past 20, 30 years has been absolutely amazing in dentistry. And that's the most exciting thing I can say about what we go over. So the prevalence of PEG laterals is about 10% of the population, and the prevalence of microdontia is about 2%, more often in females than males. And these patients that are listed here today, these are patients that just came in my practice just in the past couple of weeks. So I guess you can say that there's a little bit of a niche that I've created, from orthodontists that definitely will be referring patients over. And it's been a real practice builder for me. So it's been pretty exciting. And I think part of it is that I do have that emotional connection to these patients. So I did cite some of the articles, just kind of giving some support to some of those statistics. But what does that mean? That really means that these patients are in your practice too. And I think that is the sometimes the most eye-opening. You might not think that the teeth of the patient on the bottom is that significant of a peg. However, for this patient, it was a big deal. And so when you start to talk to a patient about what they're looking at and what they see, you might be surprised at what you think looks okay is not really acceptable for them. And so if their chief complaint is that they wish that they had bigger teeth, that is the conversation point to start talking, and to also involve parents when it's a young child. So that is something that we definitely, we can kind of get more into, because what can we do to predictably control the outcome and then plan for the future? So we can go over some of these options. Of course, we have freehand bonding, we have bulk fill technique, we have layering of composite, and there's so many amazing courses out there right now on that. And, there is so much that we say. I feel like composites can take hours if you layer, and, you can go into so much detail. We also have veneers and crowns, and then we have injectable composite. So for me, if it's untreated and if there's no plan, what do we end up with? We end up with asymmetry. We end up with arch shape size discrepancies. We have constriction of pathways. We have compromise of the aesthetics. We all know how difficult it is to move a canine later on in life. If we're doing adult orthodontics, it's really a challenging tooth to move. And so setting up a patient from the beginning and being able to work with them at a young age really can set us up for the future. So I do call that the canine challenge, because, we know that Invisalign is definitely, and clear aligners are amazing in the way that they can move teeth. But there's limitations to those. And so not many adults, not many more than ever before, but it's definitely challenging to move canines later on. So, and then obviously there's also airway concerns. If we're constricting the palate and, retracting into the tongue, there's always airway concerns, which there's so much information out there now on this, but there's a lot of patients that could have midface deficiencies, and we're responsible for recognizing that. And so setting up for the future, it's definitely the best way. So this is just, a patient from my practice came in and said, "Oh, I heard that you work with a lot of patients that have peg laterals, and, I have peg laterals. What can you do for me?" And she's 25 years old, and this is what she looks like. You can see that there's some compromise here, and there's a little bit more involved than just, treating a couple teeth. So we really have to look at that, and, why not plan for the future? So I'm excited to talk today a little bit more about proportions. So we need to be familiar with proportions. Most often patients, they have some symmetry in the face, but they may not be perfectly symmetric. And we know that. Our faces aren't symmetric. And so we just need to make sure that their smile is in harmony with their face, and understanding these proportions is critical in being able to make that all fit. So with the average patient, we might recognize if their laterals are too wide or too narrow. And we might recognize that the laterals are the same size as the centrals. And so we want to look at proportions and be able to create harmony. So I do have this thing, and I don't remember where I learned it from, but I do refer to the centrals as we really want them to be identical twins. We want them to be symmetric. We want them to have as much symmetry as we possibly can create. However, with the laterals, they can be fraternal twins. They could be siblings. They can look relatively similar, but they should be with the same proportions and size. So that is something definitely to consider when we start to kind of have those conversations with patients, especially when they're young and when their parents are present. So we want to create balance with symmetry, and we want to design a smile that's in harmony with the patient's face. So that's, there's a lot to be said about just kind of looking at a patient from a distance and looking at their smile and how that fits. So this is the most exciting thing. So for me, and I can't speak about it enough because I get so excited in talking about it. The injection composite technique is game changing. And when it's done in the right manner with controlled steps, it works and it can set our stage. It allows for us to create the size and the shape for orthodontic communication. It gives us a way to try it in. Like, we can try this in the face, and I'm going to show you how that works today. When we plan for the future porcelain work, this technique allows us to be treating that predictably later on. And my favorite part about it is that when kids are young and they're in their high school years and a critical point in time where the psychology and the social media and all of the selfie pictures and all of that comes into play, this technique can change their lives and can change their smile. And, as far as how long is it going to last and what is the plan? Well, it depends. Let's see how this is going to work. And, we look at, as long as we have, occlusion set up for us, we're going to be in really great position to be able to keep this and to sustain it for a long time. So this really has been an amazing way for me to help patients just like me and my brother. So the pictures on the right, the top picture is a picture of my patient that I'm going to be going over this entire case today. She had orthodontics as a child, and then had come back and set herself up with an orthodontist locally. And we had spoken about what we were trying to do. And she had not been in refinement yet, but I did talk to her at that point. And then we started to talk more about what she really didn't like about her smile. So the thing that is really interesting is, before she had the Invisalign or the, I'm not sure, clear aligner started. I'm not even sure which type of clear aligner therapy she had. But before she had that started, she came in and said, Dr. Figari, I really want veneers. I'm here with my mom. She wants to help me. She knows that I don't love my smile. And I stepped back and I was like, she's got these beautiful natural teeth. She's 23 years old. She just finished college. She went away with a retainer, and she was retaining teeth that she didn't love. And so that to me was the cue in to say, wait a second, hold up. Let's just think about this and let's figure out, what don't you like about your smile? And she goes, you see these two teeth on the side of my front teeth? She goes, I don't like them. They're too short. And I was like, okay, so let's look a little bit closer. So what we decided to do was to talk a little bit more about focusing on the laterals. And so the plan was, in refinement, was to add a little bit to the plan to be able to extrude those laterals. However, in this particular situation, she was only able to achieve a certain result, and she still wasn't very happy with that. But we had spoken about what the options were afterwards, and that as long as her occlusion and her bite felt good, and that we had, bilateral posterior contacts, and we went through this entire conversation, she could have composites or veneers. And we spoke about the different options. We spoke about the risk benefit of all of that. And she really wanted to make a difference and change this because it really affected her. Well, that being said, moving forward. I definitely wanted to make number 7 longer. I wanted to bring down number 10. But one of the things that what also bothered her was that number 7 was a tooth that she could see the gum, and she didn't like that she could see the gum on that side, but she couldn't see it on the other side. And this is just with her smile. So you can see that with, in this particular situation, I am very thankful that the orthodontist referred her back to me before saying, yes, she's all set and done. Because for me, we didn't achieve all the results that we wanted within the first cycle of clear aligners. And so the second cycle, she was at the point where she was ready to have them removed. And all the orthodontists that I work with, I really like to make sure that patients see me before they tell the patient that the attachments are coming off or the braces are coming off. And it's just because I don't want to be the hitman. I don't want to be the person that says something that, well, I wish I knew, or he told me that I was having them off, or she told me that I was all good. So we always have that conversation, and that puts us in a much better position in the long run. So for me, that has been really effective over time. So the plan here is to do an injectable composite technique, but we have to set the stage first. We have to confirm that the occlusion is acceptable. And so as a result, I appreciate working with the orthodontists that I do, because they do such a great job of setting me up for that. Of course, we move to the next part of this, which is the discussion with the patient to just do a scan or take an impression. And we're doing that so that we can plan for a diagnostic wax up. The diagnostic wax up or design can be done working with our labs. And that's the best part. It kind of changes up, allows us to share. And we take photos, we can align the patient's vision with the one that we want to achieve. And that's what we want to achieve together. So it's been really amazing to work with the lab and Glidewell, having done this diagnostic wax up. It's an amazing thing, because I can give instructions of, I'd like to adjust the gingival position and bring that apically by 1 millimeter and add 0.5 to the incisal edge and 1 millimeter to the incisal edge of number 10. And I'm giving specific instructions. Even drawing on a cast, you can make markings on the photographs. You can show the position of what you want to do. Now here, of course, we can look at this and I can critique myself, but I was not touching number 8 and 9, and that was a decision that I had made just to minimize risk and make sure that everything, but she really wanted that gingival position on number 7 to be a little bit higher. So as a result, I will go over what our treatment plan was, but we begin with shade selection, and I do this all in that same first appointment. So that conversation about shade selection is to avoid the patient that sits in your chair and is ready to go, but hasn't, decided today that they want to whiten. And we've all been there. We have all been there, no matter how much I do to avoid that, how much my team is trained and understands that that's not how we do it. We've all been there. And so shade selection is critical. And when, when I go through this with the patient, this opens up that conversation. So this is at the point where the wax up has been completed. And I have the patient in my chair just for a quick consult, aligning the vision. It's fairly efficient. I make sure I answer all the questions that might be involved. But the only thing they've committed to fully at this point is the wax up. So in my shade selection, this allows for me to say, okay, you're interested in whitening. Let's get that going. And then we're going to give it a solid 2 weeks after you're done whitening. And then we'll set up your appointment. We'll make sure your appointment is set up for then. So I do wait 2 weeks post any type of whitening procedure, whether at home or in office. And the reason for that is because of the shade bounce back. But this also helps me because I am pre-planning and setting the stage for myself to be successful and prevent that patient from saying, okay, I want to whiten today. So it's definitely a nice point in time to be able to bring that up. So shade selection considerations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about shade tab variation, tooth desiccation, and shade verification. So shade verification, I'm sure many of you today do it this way, right? So we take the shade tab out, we take a look at the tooth, and we take some photographs with that shade tab in the same incisal plane, and we make sure that we confirm and see that that's the shade. So we've selected B1 here, but I will tell you that I like to take it a little bit further. I typically do this that same day. However, in her case, she did want to do a little bit of try to whiten just a little bit more. So I verified it actually the day of the procedure. But I just wanted to show you how I do it. And basically what I do here is I'm verifying the shade. And what I do is I take the composite that I'm going to be using for that procedure that day, or even the appointment before, and I apply that to the facial surface of the tooth. So I'm applying it to the facial surface of the tooth and I'm light curing fully. I do not use any etch or bond. So it's easily able to be removed with like a flick of a Explorer truly or a scaler. But at the same time, I'm allowing for that full cure so that I can see that the tooth and the shade of the composite blends together. But I do want to just mention this. So there is shade tab variation, and this is important to note because especially in the aesthetic zone, especially for patients that that you probably have shade guides in every one of your operatories. Well, I do. And so these are 4 shade tabs from my office. And what I wanted to show you is that they're all B1, they're all the same shade. However, the interesting part is that these shade tabs, when I shift it to black and white, you can see that the value is different. And that ultimately would very much so affect where we're headed if we didn't do the verification portion. So for me, I can't harp on this enough. These are things that I feel very fortunate to have been taught before, but I do think it's an important part of the equation when we're doing, when we verify the shade based on not just our shade tab, but doing our verification step. So I'm excited to share that information with you today, and I hope that that is at least one pearl that's taken from today. So once we're set up with the shade, we then can speak on matrices. So what happens when we have a wax up? And I have my wax up here, and I just wanted to show that what I do in making a matrix is I actually use a small anterior tray. I actually use a lower anterior tray, and I apply a matrix material within the inside of it. But how do I select that material? It's an important part of what I do and how I do it. So I will tell you that my affiliation and my connection and mentoring at the FICOI Center, I have been a strong proponent of making sure that I do things based on the science. So in our practice, we do always consider the science behind the materials that we're using. So the matrix material that we select should be based on flexibility. You don't want it too firm and you don't want it too soft. So you want it to be somewhere in the middle, and there's something about being just right. You want to make sure that you have minimal air bubbles in your matrix. And what that means is that the intaglia surface, or the inner surface of your matrix, really has to pick up perfectly the areas of the wax up. If it doesn't, if there's air bubbles, then you will get you will have issues later that will slow your process down. So it's really important. If you have to make the matrix again, that's okay, but you want to make sure that you minimize air bubbles. We definitely want to have a high tear strength. So we don't want it to be easily torn, but we do want a high tear strength. We do want it to be durable so that we can use it again and again. We can try it in for the mock-up, and then we can use it as the injection matrix. And we do want it to be predictable. So this is just some examples of some of the materials that can be used. So the idea is that you want it to be clear. So the image on the left is a picture of the actual matrix that I used. As you can see, yes, you can see like a small air bubble on number 8. But the thing is that it's actually on the surface on the outside of the matrix, and it doesn't have an effect. But the basics with this is that we just want to make sure that we choose a material that works in our hands. And so I strongly suggest that everyone, try different materials, see what works for you. And I feel like it's the type of thing you don't need to have every single one in your office, because we want to make sure that we have systems in place and that it works, and that we're successful with it every single time. So this again is the list of materials. So one of my favorite parts about this technique is, so we get the wax up done, we make a matrix, and you're not sure if the patient and you are aligned with what you are about to do or what you plan to do at your next appointment. So pretty simple. It's up to you to kind of read that patient, have a sense. It's all about that relationship that you have with them. You know that some patients, their personality type is, hey, listen, I trust you, just get it done, let's go. You know that others might be hemming and hawing over it. They might think a little bit too much about every single step, but that's okay. That's just how what works for them. So for me, what I do is I schedule for those particular patients, and I could do it for every patient, but I want to set up a mock-up appointment. So what I do is I take the matrix that I've made. So, and I just want to show this again. I'm not sure. There's a clear tray, and I use this clear tray because it allows for me to see how it seats with the matrix material in it over the wax up. So it tells me the relative position in this arch space, so that it's not too thin on the facial, the matrix, and it's not too thin on the palatal or the lingual, depending on the area that you're working in. But for me, this has been really successful. So here we can transfer it into the patient's face. And what I'll do is I'll just use the temporary material that I use for my crowns. So I have that in my office. It's easily syringeable. I, express that into the matrix, and I place that and position it into the patient's face. So this is a picture of this patient that I'm talking about. And this is her looking in the mirror in my chair, confirming, and you can tell with her smile, like the corners of the commissures are turned up, because she likes this. She wants this. She wishes she could walk out with it today. But I wanted to make sure that I aligned our vision with what it was, what we set ourselves up for. So we're confirming here that this wax up is transferred to the patient's face. And what the benefits of a mock-up are is you can take a look, the patient can take a look, and you can confirm that they like the shape. You're aligning expectations. You're setting yourself up for success. And this to me is the best part. I feel like this is something that really helps me move forward with confidence. I am not even looking back. I know my next step and I'm ready to go. So after all of these years, this is definitely what I'm doing, especially with kids that come in with microdontia. I will have the wax up done and they'll be walking out, they'll be walking in with their parents. And usually their parents are more nervous than they are. They're ready to go and they're excited to, to close these spaces. But plenty of parents get so nervous about what to expect. And, oh my gosh, my child has to go through this. And, I feel for them too, because I've been there. But for me, the best part is aligning our expectations and putting this all together. So after having a conversation with her, she was set. She was like, can you do it tonight? And I'm like, I don't have time tonight. And I had my next patient set up. So what ends up happening is she skipped into the room ready to go when she was appointed. So here we go. So this is my treatment plan. So the treatment plan here for Alicia is an injectable composite number 7 and 10 with some laser gingival repositioning of number 7 and 10 based on the diagnostic wax up. And then not to be forgotten and not to ever truly not to forget is the retainer. It's really important. So we are going to be changing the shape of these teeth, and their retainer is no longer going to work. So whether you make a retainer yourself for that patient, or you have an orthodontist set and ready to impression the same day or scan the same day, it's critical that that patient gets right into a retainer and that we have a record of that immediately. So they will not be able to wear their previous retainer. And if they tried to put it in, it could cause harm to our restoration, which is not what we want. So this part of the treatment plan is really important to kind of lay out in the future. All right. So I really went through this step by step. For me, with all of the presentations, all of the courses that I've taken, sometimes you don't always get the step by step. And the step by step to me is a really good visual to be able to put it together and to apply this right away. So I'm excited to share like each part and each step of this entire technique. So what you'll see is that every patient, I'm anesthetizing. Whether I did the gingival repositioning here or not, I would have anesthetized. And that's just because I want to make sure that I'm able to adjust the margins and make sure that everything's trimmed and smooth. I don't want patients uncomfortable in my chair. I want them to leave with a positive experience. So by the time I'm finishing up, they're walking out, the numbness is wearing off, and we're all good. But the basics for me are making sure that we're set up for that. When it comes to the gingival position, here I sounded to bone and I had a probing depth of 4 millimeters. So I knew that I had a millimeter that I had room to adjust. So this was just the laser was used and I just I sculpted the tissue and I made sure that we had some symmetry to the other side. I confirmed that there was 3 millimeters by sounding to bone. And so I knew with confidence that that tissue was going to be predictably stay in that position. So here are just some of the images. So I basically now I'm setting myself up for the next phase of the treatment, which is the injection composite technique. So this is just a reminder that isolation is really important. And so so I always use retraction cord and I make sure that I'm setting myself up for, retraction around the gingival margin and making sure that my injection composite is not going, going to have a clean, smooth margin. I then go ahead and floss through the contacts. And when I floss through the contacts, I am making sure that the cord is being pressed into the tissue more. And what that does is if that cord is still visible, you're going to see that there's a step in the composite later. And so I make sure that I floss through my contacts to be able to achieve that. And that is a step that I know has been super effective in making sure that I have gotten even better success right away. So air abrasion is absolutely one of my favorite instruments in the office. So I've been using, I think I came back from a course, I saw it being used. I came back and was like, let's get one. And we got one, and then we got one for every room because I couldn't be without it. And I didn't want to share, and I wasn't, I'm actually a really big sharer, but I did not want to share that. So we were all fighting for it. And so successfully we have it in every operatory, and truly I can't be without it. So it does clean the surface, it removes heme, it increases bond strength. There's so many positives to it. So it's an absolute always for me. So now we can talk a little bit about the injectable universal composite, and the selection, what it's based on. So for me, that is the selection of this material is based on the density. It's based on the hardness. It's based on the tensile strength. It's based on the flexural strength. It's based on the specific wear rate and the flowability. Now, all of those things compacted into one creates a really great injectable universal composite. So, I have no affiliation or connection to any company. I am speaking from the science, the experience, my own clinical experience. And this composite is the one that I use. This is shade B1, as we had discussed, as we had selected earlier. And so this composite, it has all of those characteristics. And so for me, this is where it's at. So this is just looking, and I just wanted to show, because this is actually a really important portion. Sometimes you get the box and you don't really know, you got different tips and different sizes and all sorts of things. But what you can see here is that the syringe on the left and the syringe on the right, you can see that the one on the right is longer and the one on the left is shorter. The cannula size is the same, and you can use either. However, for me, with a matrix and having to get through the tip of the through the end of the matrix, I know that we need to use the longer length. And so you would need to have these in order to be able to penetrate the surface. If you aren't able to go all the way through, you won't get the same type of result. Okay, so I did my best to take these pictures of, and actually had a little bit of help from Dr. Sarah, who is working in my office. And we took these pictures to be able to show as much information as we can. But the basics are that we want to clear a channel. We want to create a channel. Although I have the lab make the diagnostic design or the wax up, I make the matrix myself. And the reason why I do that is because there's a bunch of things that I want to be able to kind of do, and it doesn't take me that long, and it allows me to look at the wax up and review things before I even see the patient. But I also like it because it allows me to kind of trim things back. So when I'm doing that and I'm looking at it on the model, you can see that I'm trimming to the area where I know I can confirm that it's fully seated in all areas. So that is something that I do like to do myself. And like I said, it doesn't take me much time. So what I do is I make sure that there's a clear channel. How I do that is I actually do start that with a carbide burr, and I just kind of break through to a point, but I don't go all the way through. And the reason why is I like to use an injectable composite tip, the long tip. And I like to be able to kind of work that in and out and make sure that I am through to the incisal edge of that tooth. So I do use an injectable composite tip to do that. And that is not the same as the one that I use for the actual procedure. So this is just making sure that I'm passing through, and that I'm through and through. Now, what I also do, and this is all a meticulous part of the process, I'm going to say that this is so important, and I don't do this before I do the mock-up because I don't want to have those channels there and then clog them with composite that's light cured. So what I do is I make sure that I take a probe and I push through from the inside of the matrix to the outside. And what that does, you can see here circled in pink. There's a bit of material that's in that channel, and that can't be in the channel when you're injecting composite. You're going to have a pushback. So because of that, I do spend a bit of time making sure that this is perfect. So these details are important. And so, yes, you can certainly delegate, have an assistant, trained to do this. That's all fine. But another thing that's really important is making sure that the position of that channel is a little bit more facial, and especially when we're adding to the incisal. So I make sure that it's scrubbed with alcohol. I make sure that it's clean through and through. And that composite syringe will definitely, that composite tip will definitely have a little bit of matrix material in the cannula. And so you want to make sure that you don't use that tip, because you don't want to have that push to have some resistance there. And plus you'll be pushing matrix into your composite, and then it will be contaminated. So again, super important to make sure you scrub with alcohol, make sure it's super clean, and allow for a really nice result. Yes, and air dry, of course, and it, but usually alcohol does by the time you get to that next step. All right, so we're isolated, we're anesthetized, we're isolated, we've got everything set up, and now we apply the Teflon tape. Now, I use Teflon tape all the time. And it's hard to work with in the beginning. It sticks to your fingers, it wraps around. You have to really have a technique for it. I feel like my assistant and I, Katie, have gotten this down pat. But it is something that, takes time to kind of adapt to and get used to. So if you haven't worked with it before, make sure you try it on a Type-It-On and just kind of play around with it. Try it on a composite that you're doing, in the anterior, and it's great because it's so thin and it can be stretched and pulled, and you can make sure that there's no creases. So again, this is setting myself up for success, and that's what I want all of you to do. And that's why the importance of taking some of these pictures is to just make sure that you can visualize what it is. And for me, as a dentist, we're all visual. I don't think that I know many dentists that aren't, but we also have this understanding of we have to know why. And so the reason why is to make sure that it's isolated, but we're also protecting the surfaces from the etchant and the bonding and everything else moving forward in these next few steps. So if you look at the Teflon tape, you want to make sure you minimize the creases. And as long as you do that, you really will do great things with all of this. I usually also take a cord packer, and I take the Teflon tape and I kind of pack the cord into the sulcus of the teeth that aren't being bonded to. And I do find that also is really wonderful in making sure that I am not bonding to anything else. All right, so we apply the etch. Now, the etch is applied for 15 seconds, and that's 32% phosphoric acid with BAC. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that in place. And sometimes if you get etchant everywhere, all over the Teflon tape, it can make it almost see-through. And then, to be honest, I would recommend just replacing the Teflon tape at that next step. But again, all these things to not slow you down in the process and to hopefully prevent you from, kind of making some of the mistakes that I've learned from. All right, so I can't, so obviously we're going to suction the etchant before we rinse this off, and it's just to be able to get a bulk of that, the etchant off. But I can't stress enough gently to not grab the Teflon tape. Depending on how you've applied the Teflon tape, it can definitely make this like sound, and it like makes this loud sound, almost like a kite in the air, and it scares the patient if it's in their mouth. So we try to avoid obviously all of that. So I do have my assistant switch to a surgical tip suction, and just to be able to be more specific to that area and the rinse. And then we're bonding. So obviously we've rinsed with water after the etch and we've air dried, but now we're bonding. And I do use a brush I just want to make sure that all surfaces are bonded to, that are going to be bonded to. So that is kind of my whole goal here, is just to make sure that I'm showing you step by step how to do this. So then we light cure the bonding agent. And the best part about this is I'm doing both teeth at the same time. So I'm pretty much setting myself up. I'm not, I'm not doing quadrants. There's 2 teeth separate of each other, and I'm able to isolate and get this going. So this procedure can be relatively quick once you get the hang of it. So again, matrix, right? So we're using the matrix to get everything into position. Now, the critical part is obviously the fabrication of the matrix, but second to that is the seating of the matrix. If you don't seat the matrix where the incisal edges of 8 and 9 in this particular case are fully seated in the matrix, you won't be reproducing what that wax up was, and you will have teeth that are much longer than they should be, right? So, and having to deal with that later, no way, I'm not dealing with that. So I'm going to position the matrix, and I'm showing with the green dotted line. Yes, is it hard to see through a clear matrix? Yeah, it's a little murky, right? It's a little like cloudy, but you can see that there is space around the laterals, and you can see the outline of the shape of where we're headed. Again, this couldn't be more critical. So with the injection channel position, I had mentioned it before, but I'm going to say it again. When I do make that injection channel, I am going to make sure when I'm adding to the facial and the incisal that I'm placing that injection channel a little bit facial. I don't want it to the lingual. And what that is I want to create a good path of flow of the material. So, making sure that the matrix is sealed is critical, but creating that channel in the right position is really important. So now what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that the matrix is ready, that we're fully seated, and we're going to make sure, whether it's you, and I sometimes do it with 2 fingers above the patient, from above the patient, and I'm injecting with my other hand. But what happens is that it's so important that this matrix stay fully seated the entire time you're injecting. Otherwise, you'll lose your position in space, and that's not what we want. We also don't want composite to be everywhere. 1, that's wasteful, but 2, it's also a bigger mess later on to clean up. But we want to make sure that we closely look without your headlight on. It has to be on the orange. You do not want this to cure as you're injecting. But and I actually just thought of that as I was saying it, because I flip my light over. But that is, this is setting ourselves up again. So again, this is just to review. I'm using this longer tipped version of the injectable composite. Shade B1. And what I do is I insert that tip, and I make sure that I begin my flow once I get to the incisal edge. So I'm through the channel and I'm into that incisal edge area, a little bit to the facial. And what that does for me is it allows me to watch, and you can see more of like a yellow color, which obviously B1 is not yellow, but compared to Teflon tape, there's a difference. But you can see that yellow color. And what I see is I'm watching that flow as I'm slowly injecting the composite through to the gingival margin. Once I see it there, it will kind of like flow all together. It just does this, like almost looks like it just smooths out. And then what you can do is I usually take a stop. I do not pull out the injection tip. I continue to inject as I back out the syringe. This is critical. So if you inject the composite and then you take a break and you put it back in and you try to no, it doesn't work. You have to do that. Otherwise, you're going to have a void because you're going to get air in that space. So again, important parts of this entire thing are to make sure that you're doing like step by step this way. So then I'm light curing through. I always have a little bit of excess of the composite material. and that's curing through the matrix. So this is tooth number 7. I do not remove the matrix. I'm leaving it in place because my next step is to go to the next tooth. So again, matrix is still fully positioned. We're holding that upwards still. We're holding it and pressing it into the facial surface of the teeth, making sure that it's fully seated. And then we go to the next tooth. So the next tooth, tooth number 10, we're ready to go. Same technique. We light cure. Kind of seems pretty straightforward, and it's actually so much fun. So then we remove the matrix, and we've fully light cured both sides. Well, through the matrix, we've fully cured both sides. And now I'm going to remove the matrix. So I usually take those little buttons that are on the end. I usually just flick them off with a scaler. I always have a scaler on my tray. And we remove them just to kind of create less tension on the removal of the matrix. And we're going to see this. So the basics are that those little channels create almost like a sprue that we would see with, that if you visit the labs, you'll see that there's sprues in a lot of different ways and positions. But for us with this composite, you'd almost have a sprue that you just have to remove that sprue. It's not a big deal. And again, you want to make sure that that tip has fully syringed through that channel, because otherwise you'll have a little air void in that edge, and that's not fun either. So basically, it's pretty straightforward from this point on. We're just trimming it up, and we're kind of making sure that all the contours, that the gingival margin is clean and clear and smooth. We don't want any bulkiness there. We want to make sure that the embrasure spaces are clear, and that they're where we want to be. And then we can also play around with the polishing and finishing. And that's the fun part for me. I love doing that. But I also love that this cleanup, although this looks a little bit messy at the moment, it doesn't take that long to clean up because the surfaces haven't been bonded to. So the gingival area just kind of flicks right off, and you can do that in a lot of different ways. I'm definitely gentle about it, so I do take that little bit of time. But I make sure that I use interproximal strips, seri saws, and there's tons of different ways to do that. Of course, it's what works in your hands, but I always find the interproximal takes me the most time because I'm the most particular about it. And it's a little bit harder to contour and not be so flat and sharp. So I do use the wedge technique, which again, because the patient's numb, it's really nice and easy and it doesn't hurt them. It doesn't feel any pressure. It just, you give them a heads up that you're going to feel a little pressure, but nothing sharp. And then you can polish from, interproximally. I also use my photography occlusal mirror to look at the lingual and just make sure that there's no excess. I'm sure when you make temporary crowns, sometimes you get the extra material that flows and it kind of peels away, and patients will be like, what is this? Well, I don't want that to be the case for this. It should be pretty straightforward, pretty easy to remove. And I do want to make sure that I have full visual of the lingual aspect of these teeth. So I am making sure that I'm removing all of that. And then I confirm that there's no interferences. Making sure that the occlusion is acceptable and that we're back to where we need to be, and make adjustments as I need to. So this is immediately post-op. Yes, is the gingiva a little irritated? For sure. This is technique-wise, timing. Could you have done the gingival repositioning at one appointment and then had them come back? For sure. But for me, this worked. I actually removed the cord and then I made sure that I used like a little mosquito burr and just kind of trimmed back the gingival area. So I irritated the gingiva anyway. So they were going to walk out with some irritation, and it didn't affect my bonding. I was able to get to make sure I maintained good position. So that's immediate post-op. This was the before, so you can just see the difference. And again, it just makes it a little bit more predictable, but you'll see in the finish, this is her that same day. This is post. When she came back for some photos. So she was really, really excited about the outcome. And she just said, she's like, Dr. Figari, you just gave me what I really wanted. And she goes, and I know that I can get veneers at some point, and maybe I will, but let's just see how this works. It could work for me for a really long time. And it sets her up. It's, I always say, like in my practice, planting a seed. I think that if you plant the seed early and you make sure that patients know what to expect, it makes your job so much easier and your caring of them so much simpler. So it builds relationships. It makes it a really great way to practice. And so procedures like this, I can't speak to it enough. It is game changing. It is conservative. I didn't remove a bit of enamel. I'm just adding to the enamel. So, and we know that there's a better bond strength. So if I went to go prep this patient for crowns, I wouldn't be able to do that in my heart, knowing that I have this as an option. So seeing her like this, seeing her smile makes my day. She continues to wear her retainer. She's been back in for recalls. So people might ask me, well, what happens if she chips it? What can we do? Well, this matrix or this wax up, which I can make a matrix of in a minute, you can save it. You can save it in your office. You can put it together. And we have a couple containers of those, just making sure we're organized and set. But I will tell you that you can repurpose that. You can use that again. So the benefit of it is that if the patient were to chip it, or if they, had trauma and they got bumped or whatever, chipped it, or put something in their mouth and biting their nails, those are things that obviously we have to go over those instructions. But you can definitely make a huge impact on a patient and create relationships for a lifetime. In my practice, we do scans of the patient alternating with all recall x-rays and full mouth series. We do, on the opposite appointment, we're always, my hygienist is scanning, and our hygienists are in such a track of that the best part about it for us is, if a patient comes in and, even in a couple of years, we don't have to keep this wax up forever because we've got iTero scans of those patients. And we use that to compare. So the benefit for me is, like, we have systems in place to be able to protect it. And like I said, we can 3D print that model and say, okay, we've got this. And, here we make a clear matrix and we can do the same exact technique. So the future of this is, I only wish that this was available when my brother and I were young. It definitely could have set us up with a lot more predictability and a lot more conservative treatment. But I think the one thing that I will say is, a smile becomes you, or perhaps you become you when you smile. And that's the truth. So if she became her because of this, it's pretty awesome. So the basics here, because this is a step-by-step procedure that I just went through today, I just can't push you enough to go back to your practices and say, I'm going to do this. You could do it today. And that's the best part. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited that down the road, this composite can be replaced with veneers, and you can work with your dental lab. But for now, we have a predictable, efficient, aesthetic outcome. And best of all, cases like this can make us smile. So I just want to thank Glidewell for inviting me to speak today. I was fortunate enough to be a guiding leader in the beginning, which is 2019. And I have been given such a gift from that program. And it really pushed me to be able to present today, which is pretty awesome. So I just want to say thank you for all of that, and to my office and my team to be able to put this all together. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and congratulations on a beautiful presentation. You've documented that technique beautifully, and kind of going back to our discussion that we had with Dr. Hochberg earlier about these moments of clinical success. Those kinds of meticulous procedures and meticulous planning that you showed us is exactly where those moments of success come from. So I really enjoyed it, and I also have to tell you, I think this is the most questions we have ever received on a webinar. And what that tells me is the doctors watching are planning on doing this. They weren't just watching passively. They are going to be doing this. So we're a little bit late, but let's push through. Let's see how many of these questions we can get through. It's going to be like a lightning round. Okay. Got a bunch of questions about ADA codes and fees. I don't know, it's up to you to speak to
Yeah,
that, whether you
so
want to
I
or
know
not.
it's a hard one for me. So I am a fee for service practice. So we do submit to insurance. We I feel like we do submit to insurance for patients, but we don't accept it as full payment for, so it's a little bit tricky. And I don't know. I think that there's a veneer code that you could do, a composite direct veneer code, and then there's also doing all surfaces of a composite, of an anterior composite.
Right, right,
Mhm.
exactly. Okay. And then, so there's no tooth reduction. Uh, and so the thickness of the wax up is really going to control this. How thick do you have the lab do that wax up?
So it just depends on the tooth. So there, you know how there's some pegs that are really narrow and almost like thimble, like teeny tiny shaped. You can still do it on that, but because you just want to use whatever surface area you have. So the thickness really just depends on the shape of the tooth where we're headed, to be able to set us up. And it just depends on the dimensions that we're giving the lab as far as where we're going with that.
Okay, gotcha. I had a question about the cord that you're using. What size cord are you?
Oh, that is 00 actually.
Okay.
And it's a Pascal. I've been using it and I love it. I love how it absorbs the hemostatic agent. So that's what you see in the images.
00.
Double
And then you mentioned the air abrasion unit, how you fell in love with it. Can you mention a brand?
Sure, Prep Start.
Prep
I love
Start.
it. Dan, I
Okay.
think it's by Danville.
Danville. Okay, yeah, no, I'm familiar with their unit.
Yeah.
That is a nice unit. And then how do you minimize the tissue trauma when you're using that air abrasion unit?
So I do direct the tip so that it's like I do not try to touch the tissue, but even if it does, it doesn't create, like, it doesn't stimulate bleeding. It almost kind of pats it down. So I haven't had any issues with that. Like I said, I think that, of course, that we didn't even get into it, but like having great home care and making sure you're set up for success in that way is super important. Your hygienists and team, just making sure that you have patients with good, in a good position to be able to do any type of
Exactly.
composite that's
What is
successful.
the abrasion medium, the powder that you're using?
I might need to get back to you because I have not filled that container up in a long time.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. And
yeah,
then, so getting into the technique a little bit, how do you prepare the channel in the matrix? What is the instrument that you're using to puncture that
Yeah,
matrix?
so what I do is I use like a carbide burr just to penetrate from, so this is the matrix here. Can you see?
Yeah, we can see that pretty well.
Okay, so I would go in with the carbide burr through the end here, but I would go almost to the edge of the incisal, like you can see through it to make sure. And then once I get to that point, I use a perio probe to pop through the other way, and then I push through in the other direction.
Okay. To
So,
get composite through, like what's the diameter of that channel have to be?
well, so then I'm using the tip, the injectable composite tip, which is longer. I'm using that to try it through to make sure that it passes through before I even do it. So
Okay.
that in and of itself has like the shape of it, because it's the metal tip, it creates the channel to be able to make that go through. So,
Right.
and then I'm discarding that tip because I'm using that to push through and make sure I clear the channel, but then I go back in with a new tip.
Great. Okay. And you showed how using the Teflon tape to prevent any adherence,
Yep.
onto other teeth. But doesn't the Teflon tape keep the matrix from fully seating? I had a bunch of people ask that.
It is so thin, and I'm not sure the material that we're using is super thin. I didn't bring it into my office, like I didn't bring it in here, but it's really thin, and it basically folds and picks up the details, like you can see through the tooth, like to the tooth, almost in the way that it folds over it. So because it's so thin, it's like taking saran wrap and wrapping it over. But it's very thin, and then it has a little stretch to it, so it's really nice in wrapping. There's no effect on seating the matrix at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about if you're doing multiple teeth, adjacent teeth?
Yeah, so that's like a whole nother thing. I feel like at some point I'll definitely be happy to present on that, because again, it's amazing. What I do is I would have the lab, and I've done it more so, to be honest, where the images can be nested. So if it's like a digital design, so if you were doing the front 6 teeth, you would want to inject every other tooth. So you would do one matrix where you would have every other tooth, and then you would have another matrix that would have all the teeth, but you would be able to set it up so that, and the nesting of the design is to show that there's every other tooth is being filled. Definitely need, I understand if you need a visual of that, but it is more complex, like definitely more complicated, but absolutely doable. And again, one of those things that has made a huge difference for setting
Yeah.
up patients for future.
No, that's very clever to have two matrices that sort of go every other tooth. I like
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
A lot of questions about your choice of composite, and there's a lot of questions about these supposedly omnichromatic restorative materials. Tell us a little bit about what composite you use and how you select it.
Yeah, so that genial injectable composite has been kind of the go-to. I started doing this, I guess probably like 2019, because I remember speaking to my guiding leaders group about it and being so excited. And they said, like, why don't you present on that? That would be a great topic. I have been using that composite for all of this time. I am not sure of too many others that have as many options of materials, and now they have opaque, they have like more white, and they have more options. So it can't be that this isn't the type of thing. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you could do with this, and you could probably use this as the framework for building up these teeth, and then you could cut it back and you could do a layering technique and build it up. So there's a lot of different things that I've done with it already. But that is just a composite that I love the polishability of it.
And again, what is the brand and the name?
Oh, it's the Genial. Let me just go back. Genial Universal Injectable. So it's
GENIAL.
yeah, I am gonna put that into the chat.
Okay.
Maybe it might be an
Yeah,
easier
great,
way, because
great.
the way that
Okay.
it's spelt.
Perfect. Thank you.
I just want to make sure
Okay.
that it's clear. Yeah.
And we have a couple doctors suggested that the medium that you're using in your abrasion unit is aluminum oxide. Does that sound
Yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah, that's what it
Okay.
is. Sorry,
Okay.
I feel like
No, that's why we have colleagues out there to help us
Yeah.
when we can't remember
thank you,
everything.
friends. Yes.
So here's a question. Could you work, could this technique work for tetracycline staining, right? Let's say the shape of the teeth is okay, but it's
Yeah.
the shade that you need to fix.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the type of thing that I guess it depends. It depends because we have so many different, every single patient with tetracycline staining is different. But, there is an aspect of this that I will say, and this is something that I even use in crowns to be able to mask color when I'm prepping, but you can cut back and you could build that up with a different composite to be able to bring that color to the rest of the other, to a shade that you might want to work with. And so then you are taking away tooth structure, but you could kind of set that up for yourself if that's something that this was the only option for a patient. And what I mean by only option is that usually the stop for people with veneers is just because of finances and because of time. And they might not want, they might want to be more conservative to start. And so that is something that is definitely doable. And it just depends. I feel like you can definitely play around with that, and maybe even create a tooth that's a certain shade and then see what this looks like if you did your own injection.
So when we kind of didn't really get too heavy into the fee range, but could you, obviously the choice is to do some kind of a ceramic veneer versus this. You mentioned the reasons, the conservatism, the fact that sometimes you do this in very young people, and you're a conservative dentist to begin with, but it obviously takes a lot of time. Is there a significant difference between your professional fee for doing this service versus a ceramic veneer?
Yeah, so I mean, ceramic veneers, there's definitely a much bigger fee because there's a bigger lab fee associated with it. To be honest, this procedure did take me quite a bit of time because I wanted to document it. But it doesn't take that long.
Okay.
It's pretty straightforward. So if a patient's ready to go and they want to get started on this, whether it be, I did take PVS. I definitely would take a PVS impression if I was doing it to send to you guys and have a wax up done, just because I like the detail. And I wouldn't want to just rely on an alginate for this, but you could do an alginate, you could do scan, you could do a lot of different things and be able to kind of build that up. So there is a difference in cost, but I feel like your time is what you have to factor in. And, for me, there's no selling dentistry. This is just me explaining to patients. And like we had spoken about beforehand, the energy of how you translate this and the relationship that you develop with the patient is the key. It's your practice. Like it's your build. It's the energy that patients walk in the door with is reflective of what you're giving back to them. So for us in our office, this is how we do it. So it's pretty awesome.
And
Yeah.
what do you tell the patients as far as how long it'll last or the color stability of the material?
Yeah.
How do you set their expectations?
So I have so many analogies that I use, which I may sound so funny, but I say, this is an investment in a material that's kind of similar to like, that white outdoor furniture that you can get, in the store. Sometimes that material can last forever if you take really good care of it. It can be put out year after year, especially because I'm on the East Coast, so I'm in the colder weather at different points. But I tell them that, and then I usually compare it to something that's made of porcelain, and how a porcelain your sink or and I point to even like in my operatory that can change, that doesn't change, and so it has more longevity to it. But I say for every patient, it's different. It depends on how much red wine you drink and coffee and all of those things.
I'd
And
be in
then
big
how well you
trouble.
take care of it. Yeah, me too.
Very good. Well, listen, this was a wonderful lecture, beautifully documented. You did a wonderful job. The audience obviously enjoyed it with the volume of questions that we got. So thank you so much, and thank you to
Thank
our
you.
panel, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And we're going to be off next week because we've got our Glidewell Dental Sleep Medicine Symposium, but we'll be back on April 28th. And actually, our speaker on that day will be one of the main podium speakers from that symposium, Dr. Jameson Spencer, and he'll be talking about choosing the right occlusal appliance for your patient. So I'll see everybody back here in 2 weeks, and you take care. And I hope, Dr. Hochberg, and all of you, that you have more great moments of clinical success. Take care.